in the Netherlands was a referendum.
You know, it was negative.
Who do you think was behind it?
Russia was having some interests in the outcome of the referendum.
Is the government of Ukraine helping to fix these problems of Dutch farmers in Ukraine?
We have quite a lot of interest from Dutch companies in Ukraine.
What Ukraine should do in order to be accepted as EU member in the future?
Is to concentrate on the implementation of the association agreement.
Hello, I present today a new episode of my program Eurointegrators. Our guest today is the ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands in Ukraine, Mr. Eduard Hoeks. Hello.
Good day.
Mr. Hoeks, you are a new ambassador in Ukraine. What do you like specifically about our country?
I have been now in Ukraine for almost 1 year, and I'm an ambassador in Kiev, but of course I travel also in the country. I have visited other cities like Dnipro, like Kharkiv, like Odessa, like Lviv, and I must say that I'm impressed by the beauty of the country. I really love your country. It's nature is beautiful, the cities are magnificent. It's a country, of course, in transition, a country which met many difficulties in the past, but a country which is really in progress. But if you ask me if there's anything specific I like about this country, I must say it's the people. Because I think the people are very friendly, very open, and I feel very welcome here in Ukraine, and I think that's very important.
Дякую. Are there a lot of Dutch businesses working in Ukraine? In which fields? There are some problems or wins from these companies?
Yes, I'm happy to note that we have quite a lot of interest from Dutch companies in Ukraine. We have approximately 250 Dutch representatives here in Dutch companies in Kiev. And they are basically interested in the field of agriculture, agro-industry, which of course is a specialization of the Dutch. But there are other fields also, like water management. You know, the Netherlands is a country. Part of it is below sea level, so the sea has always been our enemy, and we are developing the sea into our friend now. But we have developed quite a lot of water technology and water management, and that is where we can help the Ukrainians, for instance also in the field of river transport. Then logistics is a subject in which the Netherlands is specialized. We are an open country neighboring the sea, so we are specialized in transport, and logistics is a subject which is also important for Ukraine.
Some wins or problems of Dutch companies?
Well, the profitability of our cooperation is certainly there, so that is why we have such a huge representation here in Kiev. At the same time, of course, there are challenges. And the challenges are, of course, basically the predictability, the accountability, the system of the rule of law, the system of arbitration. But at the same time, I see that there is a lot of progress developing in these fields, and that is why the interest from Dutch companies is increasing.
What should we change in the country in order more investors are coming to Ukraine?
Well, to attract even more investment from the Netherlands and from other European countries, I think it is important for Ukraine to continue with its development of the rule of law in the business climates. Of course, there were some cases where Dutch companies, Dutch farmers, we also have quite some farmers actually living in Ukraine, Dutch farmers, who were subject to raids, for instance. And I think this is a very bad phenomenon. I think Ukraine should help us in fighting this. The predictability of your investment should, of course, be guaranteed so that you are sure of the money you have been investing in the country. So that is, I think, a subject in which progress is possible, development is possible, and we are prepared to help Ukraine in this also.
Is the government of Ukraine helping to fix these problems of Dutch farmers in Ukraine?
Certainly, we, of course, as an embassy, have been talking with with the Ukrainian authorities on this subject, with the Ministry of Finance, first with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also with the Procuratura. And we found in certain cases some good solutions. So we are still very cooperative. We see a lot of cooperative attitude from the Ukrainian side.
In 2016, in the Netherlands, was a referendum against European integration of Ukraine, and the result was negative. What do you think? Why?
Thank you for your question. It's true that in 2016 there was a referendum in the Netherlands on the ratification of the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine. In the Netherlands, there were some doubts as to whether the Dutch Parliament should ratify this agreement between European Union and Ukraine. But at the same time, the result, which you know was negative, was also influenced by other factors. One of the elements was also a strong antipathy in the Netherlands against the bureaucracy in Brussels. So it was not purely directed against Ukraine as such, but it also had to do with the feelings and the sentiments in the Netherlands about the Brussels bureaucracy of the European Union.
So it was kind of Euroskepticism? Or?
Absolutely. This was certainly a factor which played an important role in this result of the referendum. Then also there was some sentiments against the Dutch government, and these sentiments found a way in a no vote against this association agreement. So generally speaking, the result, you are right, it was negative, but it was not only against Ukraine, it was against Brussels and even against our government. When I touch upon the elements against Ukraine, the feeling was that Ukraine is not yet far enough in combating the corruption, because the feeling in the Netherlands at the time was that Ukraine was a victim of huge corruption, and that still some progress had to be made in order to combat this. In the end, our Prime Minister found a solution by going to Brussels, see his colleagues of the European Union, and to come with a proposal that the Netherlands could ratify this agreement under the condition that the association agreement would not be a stepping stone towards an EU membership of Ukraine, that the association agreement would not be an Article 5 in NATO protection for Ukraine, and that this association agreement finally would not imply an increase of financial means flowing into Ukraine. So under these conditions, which was a legally binding annex to this association agreement, our parliament in the end ratified the agreement, and we are very happy that now the implementation of the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine is in full swing.
In 2015, before even official referendum started, we saw billboards, posters, direct mail, campaigning against European integration of Ukraine, targeting Dutch voters. Who do you think was behind it?
Well, on the eve of the referendum, of course, there were many activists operating in the political arena of the Netherlands. We had several groups who were campaigning for, and several groups who were campaigning against the ratification of this agreement. We know that, of course, some of these groups were being influenced by certain actors, possibly even from outside. And I will certainly not exclude that a neighboring country, a large neighboring country of Ukraine.
You mean Russia?
you say Russia, was having some interests in the outcome of the referendum, and that this interest might have been influencing also their activities, trying to influence and targeting, as you say, the Dutch voters.
Thank you for answering. MH17 was a big tragedy, not only for Dutch people, but also for Malaysians, for Ukrainians, for the whole world. Now, investigation almost finished. What about the conclusions? Where are they?
Thank you for this question. Let me, in the first place, say that the MH17 tragedy had a very deep, emotional and serious impact in the Netherlands. And also that we are very happy that the cooperation in the criminal investigation between the Ukrainian authorities and the Netherlands is developing very successfully. We are very happy that the President of Ukraine decided to transfer the jurisdiction of this criminal case to the Netherlands. We see this as an element of trust which the President has put in the Netherlands. You know that this criminal investigation at this moment is going on under the responsibility of the General Prosecutor, the Netherlands General Prosecutor. And the Netherlands General Prosecutor is completely independent. He is operating independently from the government. So for me, as a representative of the government, it is difficult to indicate as to where we stand at this moment with regard to the conclusions. The only thing I can say is that the team is working day and night on this case to bring the perpetrators to the Dutch court. And we are hoping that the case can start as soon as possible. You know that at the same time, on the basis of some evidence from this criminal investigation, the Netherlands government, together with the Australian government, has invoked a state complaint against the Russian state. This is a parallel track of the governments of the Netherlands and Australia, which has the aim to start consultations with Russia on the acknowledgement of Russia of its accountability and responsibility for this tragedy. So we have two tracks. We have the criminal case under the supervision and responsibility of the independent General Prosecutor, and we have the state complaint against Russia under the responsibility at this moment between the Netherlands and the Australian government and the Russian government on the other hand.
Do you think they will acknowledge your complaint?
We will have to wait and see.
Scythian gold. Ukrainian government loaned it to Netherlands Museum before the war, and now we cannot get it back. What's going on with that? One guest will join our interview now. It's Emine Japarova. She is Vice Minister of Information Policy and personally participated in Scythian Gold Court. Emine, hello.
Добрий день.
Привіт, Еміне. Можеш розказати, що відбувалося на тому суді?
Так зване скіфське золото чи кейтське
Scythian gold, so-called.
Позивачем по цій справі є держава Україна, а відповідачем у юридичній справі є музей Едуарда Пірсена. Мова йде про
So
те, що
two sides in this case, Ukraine and Eduard Pearson Museum in Amsterdam. So the guild was kept in Crimea before the exhibition in Eduard Pearson Museum. And when the occupation started, Ukraine started to claim that it should be returned to Kiev, to Ukraine, but not back to Crimea, where it was kept before. Because it's Ukrainian property. So they cannot be returned to Crimea as this is occupied territory. And the agreement regarding the exhibition was signed between Crimea and Amsterdam, so the Crimea says it should return to Crimea, but it's not right.
16 року, де я брала участь, і мені тоді було дуже дивно позиція кримських музеїв, які казали,
But I now will support the position of Crimean authorities regarding the Scythian Gold, as it belongs to Ukrainian people, and Ukraine has its laws, and we cannot transfer the Scythian Gold to Crimea. Regarding the laws. So the court decision was that all the artifacts should be returned to Kyiv, to the National Museum of History of Ukraine. After that decision, the Russian Federation in Crimea, the representatives in Crimea, they claim they would appeal to the court about that decision, but Ukrainian side has its own position. It should be returned just for Ukraine. But as you know, Ukraine pays for the keeping the Scythian Gold in Amsterdam Museum.
Які контролюються Росією, вони подали своє вже аргументоване оскарження, апеляцію, і засідання цього суду апеляційного призначено на березень місяць цього року.
We will have new court in the March of next year. I don't want about the decision of the court, but I hope the Ukraine position in court will be strong. So we hope we stay for the good chances to win the case. I think Russia want to make this process longer. I was in the museum a month ago. I heard about fake news about the artifacts. I was in the museum a month ago. I heard about fake news about the artifacts. The Russian side told some artifacts were stolen from the museum, but it's not true. It's still kept in the museum.
І повернуті вони будуть тільки тоді, коли справа буде закінчена. І поки всі провадження на всіх інстанціях не будуть завершені, артефакти будуть зберігатися в музеї Аларда Пірсена. І друга позиція України...
So Ukraine's position is very strong, so I think we have a good chance to win the case.
Вигравати цю справу.
Дякую тобі, Еміне.
Дякую, колеги.
So actually, Emine explained Ukrainian position. Maybe you can explain us Dutch position.
Well, at the moment of the annexation of the Crimea, artifacts of Scythian gold found itself in the Netherlands, where they were being exhibited. A large part of these artifacts were also coming from musea on the Crimea, four musea in the Crimea, another large part coming from the historical museum here in Kiev. When the issue came up as to the return of the artifacts, the musea in the Crimea made a claim, and of course Ukraine state made a claim. We then submitted this to a decision of the Dutch judge. And the Dutch judge decided that the property of the Ukrainian state should be returned to the Ukrainian state. But the musea in the Crimea went into appeal, and we are now waiting for the decision in appeal, which will serve early, I think, 2019. And pending this case, we have to wait and see what the final decision will be. But I have to underline that the largest part, actually, and the most precious part of the Scythian gold belonging to the Historical Museum in Kiev was already returned to Kiev before the judge made his decision on the property of the gold. Mm. So a large part has already been returned to Kiev. The part coming from the four musea on the Crimea is now still under
this investigation.
Under this investigation, yes. And the appeal will serve early next year.
Mr. Hoeks, what about Dutch government projects in Ukraine? Which direction and projects do you support?
As I said, Ukraine is a country in transition where many development processes are going on. And the Netherlands is honored to be in the position to help Ukraine in this process of transition. So we have several projects in the field of development of rule of law, in the combating of corruption, anti-corruption, in the human rights field also, for which we have budgets and for which we are in contact with several NGOs who are active in this field. So our budgets, of course, are not very big. We are a small country, so we have limited budgets. But we think that with our experience, we can contribute to the successful transition of Ukraine. Ukraine finds itself in a very important historical stage of its existence. And we have seen that since 2014, many reforms have been implemented. And these implementation, well, some people think they are going slow, other people say, okay, they are on track. But nevertheless, it's important that there is some dynamics, that there is movement. And we as a country from Western Europe, we are happy that we can help. And as I said, the budgets are limited, but some of them are very effective and very appreciated.
So in this case, I have a question. Which projects in anti-corruption field was most prominent?
Well, I think at this moment, the anti-corruption institutional framework to combat corruption has almost reached its apex by the Anticorruption High Court on Anti-Corruption, which will be established in Ukraine. We have been talking on this with many members of parliament. We have been giving them advices. We know that such a court exists in only very few European member states, I think only in Croatia and in Slovakia, I think. But on the basis of this experience, I think that the institutional framework now is more or less ready. It's now about implementation. And also in the field of implementation, the Netherlands is trying to contribute to Ukraine. It's difficult to say where we were not prominent, and let's say where the successes were not prominent. We have to wait and see how the future will develop.
Okay, good luck. I have one last question to you. What Ukraine should do in order to be accepted as EU member in the future?
Well, we know that Ukraine has this ambition to further integrate into European structures, the digital market, the energy market. And we, as a European Union member state, we acknowledge this Ukrainian ambition. We see that Ukraine is a country in transition. And that is why we are so happy that we could ratify this association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine. Because this leaves us with a lot of homework to be done in Ukraine on its implementation. So what I think we should do first now is to concentrate on the implementation of the association agreement. The European member states and the delegation of the European Union are monitoring this process very closely, and we are making progress on a day-to-day basis with the technical ministries, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the ambition of Ukraine is getting closer and closer towards its final stage. But as I say, we have to first concentrate on implementation of the existing mechanisms before we think of the future.
Do you think we are not enough fast in implementing association agreement?
This is a matter of judgment. I think that in general the implementation of the association agreement is going quite well. I mean, we should not forget that Ukraine is coming from a long way. The past of Ukraine has always been full of difficulties, the recent past especially, and we have to take this into consideration when we judge the progress. I think there are excellent people working on this implementation. We have goodwill and we have a strong ambition, and together ambition and will can bring Ukraine very far.
Thank you, Ambassador Hoeks. Thanks to all who watched our program. See you next week.